All right. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for the State of the Student Worker at the University of Washington. This is our report release, and we are very excited to talk about some of the findings that researchers at the Bridges Center were able to find through surveying over 600 student workers. So people who are enrolled in at least one class and have a job, whether it's on campus, off campus, or sometimes in multiple options of on campus and off campus. And we also know that there is just a lot going on in the world today, and workers and undocumented folks and many folks are facing a lot of obstacles that are unfair and unjust, and want to name that we hope for the space to be a place where we can talk about ways to organize and make positive changes in our community, while knowing that depending on our identities and our experiences, this moment may be hitting us differently or impacting us differently. So again, heartfelt thanks for everybody for joining, and we're going to get into our conversation. So if I can move to the next slide, please. At the Bridges Center here in Seattle, we want to acknowledge that our lives and our institutions occupy the unceded ancestral homelands of the Duwamish, the Squamish, Snoqualmie, and Puyallup peoples past and present, as well as the Muckleshoot, Tulalip, and other Coast Salish peoples and all of their descendants. We acknowledge that past to remind ourselves that we live and work on colonized land, and that the racial and colonial violence waged by the U.S. empire is ongoing. In a moment, a colleague is going to put a website in the chat that is a helpful resource for learning a little bit more about whose land you are on, nativeland.ca. Additionally, we will be sharing a link to Real Rent Duwamish. We urge folks to learn about the different ongoing pursuits of federal recognition, as well as other local Indigenous-led movements happening in the areas that you live in. We move to the next slide. So we are, for those of you who may not be as familiar, we are the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies. We have been at the University of Washington for over 30 years, I think over 32 years. And we do a lot of different work, whether it's having a labor studies minor, the building a movement labor internship that our colleagues Sai and Sue Jung, both on this call, work with a lot of great students and support, and a lot of community organizations. We also do research. You're going to be hearing about one of those reports tonight, and we're always growing. Our intention is to support students as well as faculty and, of course, the community in Seattle, Bothell, and Tacoma, but also throughout the state of Washington. We want to cultivate those connections and really make changes and inform policy that benefits workers regardless of their identities and regardless of their age. You can move to the next slide. Our student worker research team, I'm incredibly proud of all of them and folks that were not able to be here tonight as well. For folks who are not presenting but are here, we have, I think I saw in the chat, Maya Bolin, Sarah Sprague, and we were able to get 2 research assistants from each campus at any given time to be working on the report. From Bothell, we have Ariga Ahmed, Bisma Ali, who will be presenting tonight, Drake Monfregolo. In Seattle, we had Maya Cruz, who is still working with our center as a researcher, Sarah Sprague. And in Tacoma, we had Maya Bolin, Ekra Mohammed, and Nikki Muratori. And these are, really loved working with everyone. It was a great experience to help direct the team during this project. And I'm really excited for them to be able to talk a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes. And the picture is from our undergraduate research symposium that takes place at the University of Washington, Seattle from last spring. And we have some of our team members there, including Maya Cruz, Sarah, Ekra, Nikki, Drake, and Bisma. Unfortunately, Ariga and Maya Bolin were not pictured on that one, but great team. And the report will be in the chat in just a minute, the online version of the report. So please feel free to download that. And we don't have time to go through everything, but definitely will give a pretty good taste of a lot of the work and a lot of the findings that the research team had. Can we move to the next slide? All right, so this is Bisma's name. So Bisma is a second year, and I think this is going to be making it a little bit smaller. Bisma is a second year student now at the University of Washington, Seattle. During this report, Bisma was at the University of Washington, Bothell, and she is a medical lab technologist major, and really enjoyed working with Bisma. She was working with us on her first year of college and really coming in with a really fresh set of eyes when it comes to student work and their experiences. And the other presenter for today is Maya Cruz. So Maya is a researcher on our team, was a research assistant last year during this project, during the beginning of this project, and is also the lead author of our report. So Maya graduated in 2023 with a degree in political science and labor studies minor, and really enjoy having the opportunity. And Maya is a huge part of our team, and grateful to have her continue to work at the Bridges Center with us. So Maya and Bisma will be presenting in just a second, but I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the report didn't just happen in a vacuum. We were influenced by organizations and work that's being done elsewhere, including UCLA Labor and University of Washington Associated Professor, the AAUP. So I want to acknowledge that we did have influence in this report, and like any good research, we hope that folks here take some influence from some of it and continue this work in the world. Also, want to shout out all of the members of our staff, including Cy and April, who are doing tech right now. Thank you very much. Cy, our Assistant Director of Community and Student Engagement, April, our Communications Coordinator, our Director, Moonho Jung, who his vision was really helpful in this report, and of course, our Associate Director, Andrew Hedden, as well. So everybody, it takes a village to get these reports done, and without further ado, I'm happy to turn it over to Maya and Bisma.
Thank you, Rachel. Could we go to the next slide, please? We'd like to begin our presentation by first defining what a student worker is. A student worker is someone who is enrolled in an institution of higher education and works in at least one paid position. In our research, we surveyed and interviewed working University of Washington undergraduates from all three UW campuses who are at least part-time students. We were motivated by the need for more research on working students that contain actionable findings and recommendations. Our research takes inspiration from UCLA Labor Center's 2020 research report, Unseen Costs, the Experiences of Workers and Learners in Los Angeles County, and the University of Washington's American Association of University Professors State of the Faculty report. Next slide, please. Our research process encompasses community-based participatory action research, which involves the community in question at every stage of the process and works towards actionable goals. In our case, involving student workers in our research was necessary to accurately represent student workers' needs and experiences across campuses. Our research was conducted with the help of 7 unique student research assistants from all 3 campuses, in addition to feedback from select student groups. I'll now hand it over to Bisma to present our findings.
Our report targeted many topics which are outlined in our key findings. The report covers demographic information, overarching student worker experiences, including where and why they work, how students balance work and school, student working conditions, and levels of awareness when it comes to workers' rights. Next slide, please. We recorded 616 survey responses. Our analysis showed that the percentage of respondents from each UW campus was closely aligned with the proportion of undergraduate students across campuses. When looking at demographics, our data showed an overrepresentation of women, with 70% of respondents identifying as women, including transgender women. Respondents had the ability to select all race and ethnicity groups they identify as, and we found that the majority identified as white, with Asian and/or Asian American following next. 28% of our respondents are first-generation college students. Next slide, please. Of the 616 responses we collected, only 5% of student workers reported having an extremely adequate knowledge of their workers' rights. Tacoma campus reported the highest rates of inadequate knowledge. 71% of Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander students reported having inadequate knowledge, making them the lowest across race and ethnicities. When asked about their awareness of experiencing rights violations, 9% reported definitely being aware, 26% reported that they definitely were not, and 20% probably were not. This demonstrates that many students who experience workers' rights violations may lack sufficient knowledge about their rights. A Seattle interviewee stated, "I remember taking the survey and I was like, wow. I was like, all of my rights were violated, and I kind of knew that to a point just because of how I was feeling." Next slide, please. By asking detailed questions concerning student working conditions, we aim to capture what challenges student workers are facing, as well as what they consider a safe and healthy workplace. 80% of student workers reported that their employer is accommodating of their academic needs and student schedules. 89% of respondents identify that their employer maintains safe and healthy work conditions. A survey respondent noted, "I feel really lucky in both of my positions. My managers are all great people who I can tell really care about their student employees. I hope the work you're doing with the survey will help contribute to future change so that positive experiences like mine are the norm rather than a rarity." And I'll pass it back to Maya.
Thank you, Bisma. When we surveyed students about what kinds of wage theft they may have experienced, 15% answered that at some point they had not received a paid break as required by Washington law. We found that this occurred most commonly in the restaurant industry, with 35% of respondents who work in a restaurant answering that this has happened to them. About breaks, one interviewee from Seattle told us, "I didn't know that we were supposed to have breaks, so I actually never had a break, no matter how long that shift was." This is just one example that shows that the lack of workers' rights awareness leaves student workers vulnerable to exploitation from their employers. We also found that 5% of student workers reported experiencing retaliation, while 15% have experienced fear of retaliation. Retaliation is an illegal tactic by employers and management to take action against a worker for engaging in a protected activity, like bringing up concerns over discrimination or organizing in the workplace. 36% of student workers reported feeling uncomfortable speaking to their employer to address issues at work. This can happen when workers are uncertain about what their rights are or when they feel intimidated by the power imbalance that is present in the workplace. Ensuring that our student workers are equipped with the knowledge to combat this is essential. An interviewee from Tacoma told us, "I'm not part of a labor union, and I was told that if I attempt to start one, then me and everyone else involved will be fired." As someone who has also previously experienced retaliation for engaging in organizing conversations with my coworkers, we need to understand this is not okay and something can be done about it. Finally, I'd like to add that our survey also covered the mental and physical health and needs of student workers. Our key finding here was that student workers overwhelmingly responded that balancing work and school caused them additional stress. Non-binary student workers attested to this at higher rates than those who identify as men or women. With this information, it's important that we find ways to mitigate the stress as much as possible, knowing that it is already difficult to be either a student or a worker alone. The recommendations that will follow address this and our other findings, both at the university and the state level. Next slide, please. Our first recommendation asks the state of Washington to mandate workers' rights education in public high schools, following in the recent footsteps of California. In 2024, the California legislature passed Assembly Bill 800, which establishes the Workplace Readiness Week, a week-long curriculum for 11th and 12th graders designed with contributions from organized labor. The purpose of Workplace Readiness Week is to equip young students with the knowledge and tools they need to enter the workforce, learning about workers' rights, local, state, and federal labor laws, and an introduction to apprenticeships. Our report shows how lack of workers' rights awareness affects student workers. In response, Washington can and should codify workers' rights education into the high school curriculum to ensure its students know their rights and to minimize the risks and vulnerabilities that come with not knowing your rights. We also recommend to the state that a law similar to Seattle Secure Scheduling be adopted statewide. Seattle's Secure Scheduling Ordinance requires that employers provide a schedule to their employees with at least 2 weeks' notice. Secure scheduling has significantly improved scheduling predictability and job satisfaction. However, the ordinance applies only to retail and food service establishments with company-specific limitations. Many student workers work for companies that are exempt from this ordinance, either due to the company limitations or because they work outside of Seattle. By adopting secure scheduling into Washington law, we can ensure that more workers gain the benefits that come with receiving their schedule in a timely manner. Next slide, please. Our survey found that some UW managers intentionally or unintentionally violate student workers' rights by requiring them to work more hours than they are permitted to or by paying them less than required. Managers and supervisors at UW are not required to take any trainings regarding how to successfully manage student employees. The lack of necessary training can lead to conflicting expectations and legal violations. A system must be set in place to ensure that all employers, including staff and faculty, are fully aware of the workers' rights they must uphold for student workers. And I'll hand it back to Bisma to finish off our recommendations.
Thanks, Maya. It would be highly beneficial to put efforts towards improving the accessibility of workers' rights education. 45% of respondents from the survey rated their workers' rights knowledge as inadequate. 46% of respondents reported being unaware of their rights being violated in the form of wage theft, not getting paid or unpaid breaks, and more. By implementing a workers' rights education course in new student orientation and early job training at the UW, all UW students will be better equipped for their future as workers. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, last slide. Thank you. Finding a job that fits a student's schedule is challenging, and just over half of respondents believe UW accommodates their work and academic commitments. Without proper accommodations, students may miss important academic activities like office hours, lectures, advising sessions, and even exams. To support working students, the university should create more accessible learning environments. UW Seattle's Student Athlete Academic Services helps athletes balance academics and commitments, a model that could be applied to student workers. Similarly, the Disability Resources for Students Office provides accommodations for students with disabilities, and a comparable system could help student workers manage both work and academics more effectively. In 2023, Washington State had the third highest union membership in the US at 16.5%, but only 9% of student workers were union members. Unions play a key role in securing better wages, benefits, and conditions, as seen in the 2024 UAW 4121 strike at UW, which led to historic wage increases and worker protections for academic student employees. To increase student worker union membership, UW could host regular introduction to unions events to educate students on their benefits. Career-specific discussions, especially in union-heavy fields like nursing, could further highlight their relevance. Additionally, unions at UW should expand outreach to undergraduates through targeted communication and events.
Next slide, please. The recommendations we offer here are based on student workers' survey responses and interviews. Their feedback and participation highlighted that the experiences of student workers are varied, and a lot needs to change. With these findings and recommendations in mind, we encourage everyone to work alongside student workers to create the environments that they want to see. Further research is necessary to continue to understand the unique challenges that student workers face based on identity, industry, and more. I'll now pass it over to the Harry Bridges Center Department Chair Moonho Jung to introduce our panelists.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for that overview. I am delighted to say that we have 4 panelists to address some of the questions, some questions related to the report. So I will introduce them very briefly and then ask them to talk about the organizations that they are part of. So our first panelist is Paul Ryan Villanueva. He is a senior fellow with APALA, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. He is also a UW alum. He got his MPA from UW in 2023, and he is also a fellow with Community for Our Colleges. Our second panelist will be Levin Kim, president of UAW 4121. They are a member of the visiting committee of the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies and is also a PhD candidate in the UW Information School. Matt McIntosh is a project organizer at UFCW 3000 and a former vice president of organizing at the Graduate Teaching Fellows Federation, AFT Local 3544 at the University of Oregon. Zion Welton is a member of the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, co-chair of Renew 46, and a trustee of Washington Young Emerging Labor Leaders, and is also a delegate to MLK Labor Council. So to get us started, can all of you, the 4 of you, talk a little bit about the organizations that you work with and the kinds of labor that they engage in?
I could start.
All
Hi,
right. Thank you, Paul.
Paul Ryan Villanueva again, and a staff for the Asia Pacific American Labor Alliance. So the APALA Seattle chapter, or APALA itself, was founded in 1992. It is under the AFL-CIO and is the first and only national organization of Asian American and Pacific Islander workers. And the organizing that we do is mostly we support a lot of the union around Washington State that has a lot of API members, right? But also we educate people on workers' rights. And for me, I'm also a staff for, a fellow for communities for colleges. So I do a lot of student organizing and talk about the issues in higher education and make that pass like laws in Washington State. But yeah.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Levin, could you talk about UAW 4121?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Levin. I use they, them pronouns. UAW 4121, which stands for one-to-one organizing, is the union of 8,000 academic workers here at the University of Washington. Our union is comprised of about 6,000 academic student employees who are students, undergrad and graduate students who are working an academic job while they're in school, as well as postdocs and research scientists and engineers. So at UW 4121, we've been a union for about 20 years. So we've been bargaining contracts for our workers and with our workers for the last 20 years, as well as organizing new workers. A big part of our theory of power is that we must continue organizing the unorganized. So we are also really energized to be part of a growing higher ed labor movement, both within Washington State, in the Pacific Northwest, and in the US more broadly.
All right. Thank you, Levin. Matt, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. As Dr. Jung shared, yeah, my name is Matt McIntosh, he, him pronouns, and I work for the members of the UFCW Local 3000, which is about 55,000 members. We work in grocery stores, in medical facilities, in the cannabis industry, bakeries, bookstores, etc., all across the state of Washington. And our members are often students as well. And so this is, especially important that we understand how we can work alongside our members who are students to meet their needs and to organize them for justice for young workers in particular.
All right. Thank you. And Zion.
Good afternoon, y'all. Thank you for having me. Zion Welton, he, him pronouns. Yeah, I'm a trustee for Washington Young Emerging Labor Leaders. That is also an affiliate of the AFL-CIO. We're for young workers that just need a little bit more kind of community. So we do 35 and under. And then I work for IBW 46, which is electricians, many other contracts, but primarily electricians. They're lighting all the light poles in all the greater Seattle area.
All right. If I could ask everybody who's not a panelist, maybe to mute yourself, that would be great. All right, so I've got a question for each of you. Let's begin with Paul. How does organizing in our communities affect organizing in our workplaces?
Hello. Well, we are a constituency group under the AFL-CIO, so we often describe ourselves as the bridge between community and labor organization. I think that's because organizing in both communities and labor are deeply interconnected. The issues we face in our community, such as poverty, health inequities, and so on, are also the same struggles that workers face in everyday life. We know that we can do something at your workplaces because if you have a good paying job that provides healthcare and other necessities that workers need, then we wouldn't have a lot of issues that we have now in our community. Given also that, that doesn't solve everything that is wrong. So I think it's important to educate community members about how each individuals get affected with current issues so that we could create an understanding and foster a sense of solidarity with each other. The societal change is what is needed and trying to convince more people into why organizing in workplaces is good and important. As an example, when we talk about Asian Pacific Islander communities, there are always these power dynamics that might seem just like a cultural thing. Some people often just not say anything, even if they are being wronged. So educating them about their rights to speak up, their right as a worker, then you're able to initiate conversation and shift that cultural attitude on organizing rather that be in the community or workplace. But yeah.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Levin, the report, many of the respondents to the survey in the report are undergraduates at UW who work at UW. And so my question for you is, how can undergraduates, whether they are academic student employees or not, become involved with UAW 4121? And how might they organize to make changes in their workplace on campus, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you, Munho. That's such a great question. I well, a couple of things. I think first and foremost, if you are an academic student employee, join your union. I think we have had in the last 1 years a lot of energizing academic student employees who are undergrads that bring a really fresh perspective and have gotten really groundbreaking contract protections because undergraduate ASCs have been involved in building our power and advocating for our needs as workers at the UW. Otherwise, though, I think there are a number of ways. As Paul mentioned, I'm also a proud member of APALA, and I think, as Paul mentioned, there are a number of groups, including APALA, including the Bridges Center on campus, that are really making like a vibrant labor movement and community that extends beyond UW as well and has an impact beyond UW. And so, if you're not yet an academic student employee, definitely getting plugged into organizations like APALA or the Bridges Center and then participating in building out that movement, I think is another great way to get plugged in. We're really excited that for the last 2 years, we've been hosting a Bridges Center Building a Movement intern with UAW, and a lot of our undergraduate workers that came in through the Building a Movement program. I think all of them actually have gone on to become union organizers themselves. And so that is another way where programs like that really help us to maintain a connection with the undergraduate community and undergraduate workers. And also, we're hoping to be a place where undergraduate workers that are working with UW 4121 in those communities can also find themselves connected to a really exciting and growing movement of undergraduate workers across the US that are finally sort of building power to have a real say in the workplace. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our siblings at Western Washington University and Central Washington University, as well as their colleagues at Washington State University, who have all formed many undergraduate workers at those institutions who have formed unions in the last couple of years and won really groundbreaking contracts that now we at UW are learning from, and our undergraduates are hoping to win as well. I know Lexi is here or was here. And folks like that has really made the growing Washington higher ed labor movement vibrant. So getting plugged in and making connections to be able to win those kinds of victories in the future, I think are a great place to start.
All right. Thank you, Levin. And then for you, Matt, especially for young workers who know nothing about organized labor, can you explain what, becoming a member of a union like UFCW 3000, like what kind of a difference that would make
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
workplace? Yep.
Yeah. So the question is, what difference do you want it to look like as a young worker, right? The whole theory of change in organized labor is if you have a need, your community has a need, right? We use our labor power and our solidarity to pursue that need or that want or desire. To get a little bit more concrete, though, at UFCW 3000, for example, we're about to, or we've begun to bargain our grocery contract. We call it the Allied contract. If you shop for groceries anywhere in Washington, definitely be paying attention in the coming months. And what we're titling that bargain is better wages and better staffing, better stores. We recognize that as grocery workers, we're the backbone of communities, right? In the same way that educators are, right? And so we should be starting to treat these stores in the same way that we treat goods like public education, right? People deserve a high quality public education, just like people deserve high quality, healthy food close to where they live at prices that they can afford. And we know that our union has a key role to play in building those stores because if we look nationally, what have been some of the major topics of discussion is the price of eggs, right? It's become like almost shorthand, right, for inflation. And so we would be remiss if we weren't engaging with making food and healthy food and safe stores, a major part of our focus. But for young workers in particular, the scheduling issue that was highlighted earlier, I think is really, really important, right? So the secure scheduling law that was referenced, that's something that we bargain into our contracts, meaning that if the employer attempts to prevent you from having your schedule 2 weeks in advance, you have the right to bring a grievance, what's known as a grievance, a formal complaint against the employer, and they are obligated to respond to that and fix that. So I mean, we all know how hard it is to balance work and school. So that's another good example. Accommodations for whatever needs you have on the job, whether that is learning styles or accommodations that you would receive in a classroom, disability accommodations, et cetera. Those are things that our union and any union should go to bat for you on, as well as anti-discrimination. The minute that unions start saying, oh, we're just worried about wages and benefits, that's when we start losing ground, right? We have to build coalitions that recognize that workers are whole human beings. And so it's essential that we put the whole humanity of our members at the forefront of what we're fighting for. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight apprenticeship and training programs. So often we hear we lament this the absence of apprenticeship and training programs in public high schools and post-secondary schools as well. And your union can provide that. That's something that 3000 does, and many unions do. So that's just some of what unions have to offer. But the sky's the limit, so get involved and get organizing.
All right. Thank you, Matt. And then for Zion, could you talk a little bit about how your organization, Washington Young Emerging Labor Leaders, addresses apathy and other potential barriers to organizing, especially organizing young workers?
Yeah, definitely. I think Matt would 100% agree that apathy is like the killer of unions. So we're definitely always trying to figure out ways to attack that. And how YELL for me personally has kind of energized me a little bit more and brought me back more into the labor movement. Typically with like older unions, at least for building trades, construction, they don't really invite in a lot of the new members on the inner workings of like meetings and like Robert's rules and even like how to file a grievance or like once you deal with like some injustice at your workplace, like what are the next steps? Sometimes it's pushed aside. But YELL has kind of like educated a lot of its members on like how to actually empower your voice, how to yell, right? And then also another big thing that they've done for me is kind of tying me back to feeling like so often you work so long, you work many hours, you just kind of feel like a number, just an electrician, just a cashier, right? It can feel like you're very disconnected from even yourself and like your own social desires. So Washington Young Emerging Labor Leaders has like pushed for a lot of like social issues outside of that and back into the labor movement because nothing's worse than when you're like finally getting enough energy to actually go out to the streets to make noise on something you're like proud about, but then you have your employer is like standing against you in the streets or online, so Washington YELL has been great at actually getting that to MLK Labor, been getting that to other areas, more education on just like how to actually make your union also part of you. Because the saying is the union is you. So it kind of reconnects those links.
All right, thank you. And let me throw out a general question for everybody. And maybe you could even just respond to specific parts of the report if you want to, but more generally, what advice would you give to undergraduate students who want to organize for change at work? And your advice could be very general or very specific.
Um, don't be afraid. I know as an undergraduate, we are put in a lot of new environments. I remember being an undergraduate and feeling overwhelmed. We often are scared to do anything that might affect our work and studying at the same time, especially retaliation at work, right, in the report. Um, but don't forget that you have the rights. So learning and understanding those rights are important, but also educating your coworkers about it. Be strategic. That means building relationship and consulting with those that knows the ins and out of organizing, and be resilient because organizing is hard and is often a long game.
All right, whoever wants to go next.
Yeah, I don't know how to follow that up. Thanks, Paul. But I think this is just going to be a variation of what Paul said as well. But I think as an undergrad, I'm an international student, so I came to the States as an undergrad, and wasn't quite sure about like who I was and how to relate to like all of these systems that were around me. All of a sudden, like as a student, as trying to figure out the US, trying to figure out US healthcare as an undergrad without any, support systems in the US, all of those things. But one and also as a worker, as an undergrad worker working at the cafes, in the libraries, I think if I could tell myself one thing, it would be to take like or myself or whoever is just to take yourself seriously. And what I mean by that is like taking yourself and your work seriously, because the work that you do as an undergrad worker, whether it's for UW or contributing to the broader economy that all of these educational institutions are a part of, that's serious work. And oftentimes, as an undergraduate student, or as high school students, or as student workers in general, student workers are put in positions and are occupy positions that lead people to not take themselves and their work seriously. And I think that's a really big lesson that I had to learn, and also one of the lessons that I'm grateful to have learned over my organizing journey, is learning to take my work and my being seriously so that I can fight for myself and other beings that are sharing this community with me and are, engaging with capitalism in the same position that I'm in. So I think the sooner that undergraduate students can take themselves seriously, to advocate for themselves, their positions, and do the thing that Paul is saying, becoming fearless, making strategic decisions, learning from mistakes, learning from other people, I think we'll have a really strong, and we do have a really strong and growing movement, and I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah,
All right.
I can go next. And really echoing what Paul and Levin have shared. I love the idea of taking yourself seriously and not being afraid. I mean, because the first thing the boss is going to do is, assuming that many student workers are, under 30 or so, the boss is going to immediately start using your age as if, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't actually need that. This is a temporary job. You only work here X numbers of hours a week. They're going to minimize you and belittle you when, as Levin pointed out, the boss, like you're taking it seriously because they're taking it seriously, right? You play an important role in a community, and if you didn't show up to work, the boss would take that seriously, right? And so your work matters. The other things I would note is, so much of our social life in the US is really fractured, right? But college campuses are often a little bit different from that. And so you're already organized in so many ways. So there's such a hotbed of organizing at UW, and in the broader community, and use that to your advantage, right? You are already organized in ways that are not legible to the boss, right? Whether it's through friendships, housing arrangements, other organizing that you're doing on campus, or off, use those relationships to your advantage. And then, just I think the strategy going forward is there's so many fights we have to fight, and so a movement of movements is critical. We need to take each other's struggles seriously, and so many students at UW who are also workers, I think, already put that into practice and don't view it as this kind of, oh, I only have time for this. The theory is to bring more people together to build coalitions, and so building those coalitions across many causes. And then finally, like, you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose. And the point of it is to get back up, right? They're gonna tell you that you lost a court case, they're gonna slap you with legal fees, they're gonna fire people, and just don't make the loss the end of it, right? Because you'll lose a few times and then you'll really start winning. And that's all that matters.
Yeah, I'd love to end it off with like pretty much what everybody already said, but yeah, organizing is very tough work. So make sure that you kind of know what you're attacking and how to attack. There's a lot of different strategies on like how to attack with organizing. There's many more that you can always come up with, but Jane McAlevey, she's a wonderful author that has like gone through and really explained like how a lot of different contracts that she's helped with, um, how she has seen like different means testing and stress testing to make sure when you do have your action, you do have your big push to try and unionize or get votes, um, that those votes are there. And then also just trying to it's really passion work when you're trying to push for all this stuff. Um, but when you're trying to make changes, it's long and overbearing. So make sure that you have people around you that can kind of support you, kind of keep you tied into what you want.
All right, thank you. So if I could recap, it's don't be afraid, take yourself seriously, take advantage of the college setting, build solidarity on multiple fronts, expect to lose, but attack wisely and strategically and passionately, right? In our struggle against capitalism. All right. I'm going to hand things over to April Rubio, the communications coordinator at the Bridges Center, to moderate the questions from the audience. And thank you to the 4 panelists.
Hello all. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and if you'd like to keep them coming, I will read through them. The first one is from Su Young and says, I'm curious which industries students work in and how many hours on average every week.
So we actually asked about that in our survey, and a lot of the responses for industries varied, but we saw a lot of people in educational services, retail services, food and beverage services, and even people in research, healthcare, app-based work, like there's a lot of variety for sure. And then in terms of hours worked on average, I believe the majority of students work 10 to 19 hours a week, and following closely is 20 to 29 hours a week, going all the way up to a few respondents worked 40 plus hours a week.
And the next question is from Elle and says, does the research include understanding the types of workplaces students were in? Specifically wondering size of business and not in a union because there was none versus because of lack of information and other reasons, and specific findings related to UW employment and problems related to employment at UW.
Yeah, so we didn't survey to see why student workers weren't in a union, but we do know that 9% of the student workers responded that they're not in a union. Oh no, sorry. 9% responded that they are union members. 91% said that they're not union members. And we also asked whether they and their coworkers had ever considered considered or discussed the possibility of unionizing their workplace. And 15% said that they had considered that, but 85% said that they had not. And so, though I don't have a specific answer, I think it's definitely a combination of things, whether it's not knowing that they have the right to organize, seeing as we know that students aren't fully aware of their workers' rights, or if they're scared of retaliation, or if they have experienced retaliation, or if they're not feeling that sense of solidarity with their coworkers. There's a lot of reasons why we saw that student workers are not unionized. And we also found about UW that, I'm looking at my notes. That 57% of student workers are currently employed by UW. So that was a little over half of our survey respondents, and 43% are not employed by UW. And 54% of unpaid positions are at a UW campus. So we asked whether students were working in an unpaid position alongside their paid position, and 54% of those people are doing an unpaid position at UW campus. And what we heard from a lot of student workers who are doing unpaid positions on UW campuses, they were saying that they were often working over the 19.5 hour limit, or dedicating more time to that position when it's unpaid. So yeah, that's what we found about UW. And with problems related to employment at UW, I would say that a lot of it was anecdotal. We heard a lot of it in written responses and in our interviews. If you want to read more about that, it's in our report.
Thanks, Maya. And you also answered the follow-up question from Young about folks working on campus or off campus. And if anyone has more questions, you can raise your hand on Zoom or put it in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Levin. I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I was wondering, I really enjoyed the report, and I was wondering if anything came up about students and gig work and like the flexibility that things like gig work platforms provide. And I was wondering if anything came up in your comments around that. And I was wondering for Maya and Bisma, what like one thing you remember from the interviews that struck you as fascinating, or like something that stuck with you. I'm just curious what some of those insights were.
Yeah, I can answer the first question. In terms of gig work or app-based work, we saw that 2% of student workers were working in that, so quite a small portion of our survey respondents. But the reason that students were accepting their position that came up the most was flexibility of schedule at 83%. So I think a lot of students are considering the fact that they have busy school lives and then also their social lives, and making sure that they're taking care of themselves in considering what jobs they're choosing. So yeah, flexibility for sure came up a lot in our survey.
As for really interesting things that came up in interviews, I would say there were a lot of themes that came up multiple times across even like campuses. And I think one of those is just the difficulty with balancing work and school, and how other aspects of student worker lives are take a hit from that. And a lot of them prioritize their work and their school over their social lives, or even like personal lives, and like taking care of themselves, which we covered in our report as well. But yeah, I think that was definitely something that struck me, showing how student workers are very dedicated to places and people that might not prioritize them. And I think that that's something that should definitely change.
Yeah, we did see a lot of students saying that they were working in jobs because it paid them more, even though they weren't being treated as well there. People describing instances of discrimination or just disrespect, but they chose to stay there because of, or felt that they had to stay there because of how well it was paid, compared to if they wanted to leave and risk unemployment or the difficulties that come with looking for another job. And I think the one thing that stood out to me the most in our interviews was hearing from someone who was paid not minimum wage for an entire year. As we know, it updates annually. And so they were paid the previous minimum wage for about a year. And it took a lot of effort from them and their coworkers to organize to get back pay.
Thank you. We have a next question in the chat from Carolyn regarding students being unaware of their rights. Were you able to learn if there were certain rights that were more or less known and which ones were violated or most violated?
We did ask like a breakdown of different rights violations that may have occurred to student workers, and I think a lot of that came in the form of not getting their breaks, their paid or unpaid breaks, when they needed them. I think I even heard, this is kind of reminding me of the last question, but in an interview, someone was saying how on their breaks, if the employees were talking about how they weren't having a good time, or like it was like a really busy time and they were just stressed, and a manager or somebody overheard them, then they could be sent home on the spot and they would lose their hours for the rest of the day, and possibly could have faced other consequences, I guess. But yeah, I think it was quite varied in terms of what rights people were aware of. And I think it was a majority of managers not giving breaks when they should, and a combination of the student workers not knowing that they could take those breaks.
Yeah, we also did see some folks who weren't paid for the lack of sufficient notice in schedule change, which comes from the secure scheduling ordinance. Usually, or not usually, but from what we saw, some employers were ignoring that aspect of it. If there was any last minute changes to schedules, there were also a few instances of discrimination. 3% of our student workers said that they had experienced discrimination, and 9% said that they were unsure. And 46% of student workers said that they weren't aware or would not have been aware if they were experiencing rights violation. So if we don't know what specifically they were, we do know that students were feeling unsure of what was happening, but there was a sense that, something wasn't right.
Okay, we have another question from Paula in the chat. How many students surveyed work and dining services?
Our survey showed that 14% of people worked in food and beverage services and 6% worked in restaurants. And we even interviewed some people that worked in restaurants. And I think something that came up quite a bit was that they would take their hours whenever they could get them, because it paid really well, even if it meant that they would lose out on hours at somewhere else or time spent doing school or going to classes. So I think the demands of the food industry are definitely different compared to other ones. And I think you see that in student workers a lot.
About dining services at UW, we didn't see or survey specifically for that. But I do recall mentions of HFS, so I could definitely look into our survey data again.
There's a question from Carolyn in the chat. I'm sorry if you remarked on this already, but were you able to learn how often students change jobs during their undergraduate studies, especially given changing course schedules, personal responsibilities, etc.?
I don't think we found any data specific to how often they change jobs, but I did hear a lot of interviewees mentioning that when it came to scheduling accommodations, they would prioritize work over school. And like if their work was giving them a certain set of hours, they would fit their school around it. And like they would find different, because I guess the school scheduling system is less rigid than a work environment. And so they would choose classes or like specifically tailor their schedules so that they could go to work in the mornings and then go to class in the evenings and things like that. But we didn't touch specifically on how often they changed because of their schedules.
Does anyone have any more questions? Oh, I think I missed a question from L. Was there anything specific about dining services at UW?
Yeah, I think I did answer that. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not in our report, but in our data, I'm pretty sure.
All right, if there are no more further questions for right now, before we get to a place of folks hopefully being able to read the whole report, I want to just take another moment to congratulate the researchers, Maya and Bisma, and everybody who was here or not here who participated in this report. It took a lot of effort and time, and also want to shout out all of the organizations that gave us support, whether it's through the idea or it was through giving us feedback, all the faculty, community groups, etc., that let us into classrooms or took flyers, did the survey, and of course, everybody who agreed to be interviewed as well. Special shout out to everyone who agreed to be a panelist today. And yeah, I think I might have saw a question come in just as I was talking. Well, we would love to connect with you as well, UCLA Labor Center. Jonathan, do you think the results found here were similar to those of the UCLA report? So I'm going to turn it back to Maya and Bisma for their take on that.
Yeah, I was just typing my response. I'm not sure. I think we would have to go back and compare on the questions that were similar to the ones from the UCLA report. But maybe, and if there is, I'd be curious to see where the differences and the similarities are. Also recognizing that the UCLA report was for all of Los Angeles County, and this was just for students of University of Washington. So even if we were to compare, King County or Whatcom, which is where Western Washington University is, it would take other research.
Thank you for that question. Anything else in the chat? All right, so I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. And if you have questions about the report, please feel free to reach out to me and I will loop in the appropriate team members to address your questions. But yeah, we want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to all the staff at the center for all of your support. And yeah, hope everybody has a good day, continues being optimistic, continues organizing, and knows that we are in this fight together. Thank you all.